Someone who I'll call Karen says, look, generally I'm an open and authentic person, except that I've had breast cancer diagnosis a few years ago, and I don't want to share that with that many people. But she says it does feel like a secret, and it makes her sad and frustrated, when she doesn't want people to ask about it. But but it does make her feel like there's something off. How does she correct that feeling where she's trying to balance not telling the world, but not, as you say, not wanting to be inauthentic?
It's a good question, but remember, being authentic doesn't mean that you make a decision that you have to be a complete open book to every single person. I talk about it in my life. I have 3 tiers of people. I have my inner sanctum. They're the people I trust wholeheartedly, and they're a small group of people who I will deliver my authenticity to as best I can. There are people in the kind of middle tier and the outer tiers. Will I deliver the true rawness of what's going on in my life at all times? Of course I won't, because it might be that I've made the decision that it's not appropriate, or they may not handle it, or actually it's not right for me. So authenticity doesn't mean that you go out there and that you're just completely raw and open with everybody. I think as long as you're making the choices that there are people in your life who you are visible to and see you as you are, that's absolutely fine. But there's no conditions that you then have to deliver, the more difficult parts of your story to everyone. That doesn't make you inauthentic. The authenticity comes from that you're making the choice about what's comfortable for you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense to me, I'm sure.
Good. I hope it does to Karen as well.
I hope so too. Someone called Domenico says, comes from a similar background, cultural background to yours, Owen, but grew up in Italy, and also hid their sexuality for a long time. And their question is, although they've wanted for a long time to visit a therapist, I still haven't done it. Is there a way to find a therapist who I would feel comfortable with, or is it really a question to try a few until you meet the right one?
That's a brilliant question. It's a really, really important question, actually. And I think it depends in the context. But, and I'm going to answer this from the kind of LGBTQ plus thing, because there's a lot of work and research done on this here. And one of the things around, people who are struggling with sexuality in particular, it's really important that they get a therapist that is actually not going to try and convince them that their sexuality is wrong. Because if the therapist is holding any particular beliefs about right or wrong, there's a difference. Now, you would hope that it doesn't happen, but unfortunately it does. I've had it in my own experience in therapy, where someone asked me to consider whether I'd given enough time to consider if I was heterosexual. Not a helpful question, because it can be another shaming, and my response was, well, have you ever spent any time considering your gayness?
That's perfect.
So, I mean, it's a nonsense question. So I think
what was the look on their face when you said that?
Well, that relationship didn't last very long. But I think to answer that question, of course, you should always ask around. I think recommendations are always key. If you've got a friend who saw a therapist and they were exploring similar issues, check out. There are also websites you can go onto as well. LGBT friendly therapists are people who are going to be open and receptive to what you're talking about, because what you don't want to do is add another layer of shame going to a therapist who's going to criticize or judge in any way, shape or form, particularly around religion. My experience is that often religious or spiritual beliefs can get in the way because morality comes into the question.
Someone called Lou says, what happens if you can't move past your story once you tell it? Does it become a Pandora's box?
I mean, again, it's a really, really big question. My question to that would be, what stops you moving? I often I don't like the phrase moving on. People often say, well, why can't you just move on? I don't often think it's about moving on. I think it's about how you move through your story. So if someone presented that to me in therapy and they said, I've told my story and I know what's happened and I'm still struggling, well, then the next question is, okay, where are you stuck? And that's often about fear. And that's often about, what would it be like to let go of the story? What would it be like to move through the story and reclaim other parts of your life? And I think in the majority of cases, when I come across stuckness, I'm coming across fear.
Right.
So the answer to that question would be, the likelihood is, I would imagine, I don't know the context, but I would say have a look at have a look at the fear aspect.
Jenny asks, because therapy is so inaccessible to so many, you know, with long waiting lists and high thresholds accessing the services, she asked a very practical question. Do you think that your book can be a replacement for actual therapy?
No, it's a brilliant question. And I say this throughout the book, and I've been asked this a few times with the media, 110%, it is not a replacement of therapy. My argument was that, you know, The Guardian did a piece about a year ago, and they estimated that there are potentially about 8 million people in the UK. And they did this piece of work with NHS providers who are potentially waiting for treatment. Now, it doesn't matter how you look at the figures. The reality is, and I know this as a former clinical lead for mental health, you know, and this is not a criticism of the NHS, who do a brilliant job under very difficult circumstances. But what I do know is that, you know, what we have isn't adequate. It's not enough. And we need to be brave enough and truthful to say that. There are, the way the system's, particularly in the UK, you've got people who they describe as having mild to moderate disorder. And I don't like the word disorder, but I'm using, you know, clinical speak, and severe presentations. What that doesn't account for is that you have millions of people in that middle ground who don't meet these criteria, who don't, and find it difficult to access support. So of course, what I've tried to do in this book is, you know, I'm mindful of many people out there who are struggling and waiting. And while it's not a replacement for therapy, my argument is it's a hell of a sight better than nothing. And in my experience, sometimes in therapy, sometimes a word or a phrase or an insight can be enough to get somebody started on their journey and can help move them forward. So even what I talked about earlier about how we talk to yourselves, if someone picks up the book and reads it and they, by the end, have got one or two concepts that challenge them and make them think and reevaluate and review, I've done my job. And I think very often that's true of real therapy. If you can get someone to really stop and reevaluate and rethink how they're living and consider changes, you've done your job. So the book isn't a replacement, but it's a hell of a good place to start, I think.
An anonymous attendee says, how can you free yourself, not run and tell your story if you're afraid of telling it honestly due to family attacking you for telling your truth?
It's you know, and I think it's an important question. And maybe telling your story to the family isn't the best choice, you know, and I make that really clear. When you're telling your story, be careful who you tell that to. But I guess it's kind of almost a trade-off, really, isn't it? Because again, it comes back to this. It's interesting how often fear comes up in these conversations, because I guess it's a trade-off between, okay, well, if you're holding back because of fear of family, you then have to look at the consequences that has in your life. And sometimes in telling our own truth, it might make other people uncomfortable. Like in my own story, coming out was terrifying because of the fear that I was from an Irish Catholic family. That was not the desired outcome. So I think sometimes it's about weighing up the risk. Okay, well, this might hurt people and it might upset them and it might lead to conflict, but that doesn't always mean that it's a wrong decision. And I guess it's about weighing up. If somebody was saying to me, look, if I do this, I destroy my family, and the aftermath of that is too much and it's too big, then it might be that, okay, well, telling the story in its fullness may not be the most sensible thing to do because it feels like that the price tag is too hard to pay. But that doesn't mean that they still don't find an outlet, whether they write the story or they tell it to somebody in private, you know, asking for confidentiality. It doesn't mean that they don't find an outlet for telling a story, but it might have to be counterbalanced with the kind of the broader impact.
Another anonymous, how do you address anger with therapy when you don't know what triggers it and why?
There will always be a why, and there will always be a trigger. So good therapy will be about helping discover. Anger doesn't, you know, it doesn't normally come from nowhere. There will always be a situation or an event or, you know, some contributor. And I guess it's about digging deep and kind of exploring around that or looking for patterns. I think often with anger, what you'll find is that there's patterns, or, you know, maybe different contexts. There will be things that trigger anger. So I think it's about exploring more and look for what those triggers are.
Alex says, is it possible to give an idea of some of the short techniques that you can use in the day? I mean, it's obviously a big section of the book.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a kind of broad sweep in that. So the first half of the book is like a crash course in therapy, telling your story, mapping it together. I describe it like it's a jigsaw, you know, fitting it all together so you understand how you're functioning as an adult today and where the problem areas and the challenges might be. The second half of the book is about kind of weaving therapy into your day. So I've broken it down into ready, steady, reset, reflect. So the ready bit is getting set up for your day. And my kind of argument with that is, look, if you start the day grounded and clear about your motives and your goals and your boundaries and all of that stuff, then you're going to feel a greater sense of control in your day. Most overwhelm and people feeling stressed and burned out is because they don't feel in control. So I think the beginning section of the beginning section of this part of the book is about, okay, how do you get yourself into that mindset that helps you feel a greater sense of control and order? The middle section then is, you know, in the middle part of your day, you know, most of us, for whatever reason, deviate off path a bit. You know, we start to wobble, we become a bit tired, our thought patterns may not be helpful. We may be working too hard. We may not have taken breaks. So it's a very pragmatic look at, okay, well, how do you come back to a point of equilibrium and stability? And more importantly, how do you check in with yourself? I mean, this is the key message in the second part of the book. Most people are on autopilot, just kind of crash landing through their day without stopping to work out where they are. So, you know, if you're not stopping to check in where you're at, how can you adjust? And then, of course, the end part, the reflective stage of the day, is really about, you know, if you're not dealing with what's going on in your life, then you're not processing. So if you're just going to roll one day into another, into another, into another, without dealing with any of the stuff, then eventually it's going to accumulate. So the final section is about how you deal with the day, you know, how you process the events of the day, and more importantly, what can you let go of? You know, most of us take a terrible lot of worry and anxiety to bed at night. And often there is real power in thinking, okay, well, what can I let go of? What, you know, what doesn't belong here? What can I literally let go of for today? And then, you know, obviously that helps with sleep and a sense of balance and stability. So I guess the second half of the book really is about monitoring, checking in, stabilizing, and making sure that you're constantly adjusting and tweaking when we need to. Because, you know, look, if you had a heart problem, David, and a cardiologist said to you, okay, this is what I need you to do. I need you to make tweaks to your diet, your lifestyle, your exercise, because if you don't, you're going to have a heart attack or you're going to run into more problems. You'd probably take that quite seriously. And I kind of think that this is a travesty because, you know, why wouldn't we do this with our mental well-being? You know, the brain is, you know, the epicenter for all of your experience, for, you know, all of our experiences, really. Why wouldn't we be taking time out to make sure that it's been maintained and been nourished and looked after and, you know, tweaked and adjusted when needed? Why wouldn't we be taking responsibility for all of that? And I think, you know, over the years, mental well-being has just got, you know, deprioritized. And a big part of this work is about maintenance.
If very briefly, we've only got a tiny bit of time, but last question. Someone says, look, I've been divorced for years and just feel stuck. And he just talks himself out of a new relationship and simply says, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a brilliant, thank you for the question, and thanks for all the questions. They've been really brave and honest. What I want to say, whoever asked that question, is there is nothing wrong with you. You know, as a human being stuck or having difficulties doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means that you're human. And what I would say is, look, you know, if it's been going on for a long period of time, it just means that there's a pattern that potentially needs looking at and adjusting and work. And it's about working out what that is. You know, I don't know the context, so I can't give an answer to it, but there will be a reason you've got stuck. And, you know, this is what good therapy is about. You know, find the reason, understand why you've got attached to the stuckness or why you've got attached to a part of the story that you're finding difficult to let go of. And then when you discover that, then you've got the choice to do something about that. So, you know, to anyone today who struggled at any level, what I'd say is there is nothing wrong with you. if you struggle, if you've got a bit of anxiety or panic or difficulties with your mood or anger or grief, whatever the context might be, there is nothing wrong with you. You're a human being who sometimes struggles and who sometimes will struggle. And I think we've got to get much better at depathologizing mental health and seeing it as part of our human condition, that we're all on a trajectory and sometimes we'll deviate up and down. And that's part of our humanity, but we just got to learn to be kinder to that part of our humanity.
Owen, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, thank you, David. It's been great.
Thanks for talking to us very much. And I hope we'll see you again.
Lovely. Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Bye, Owen.